Okay, we're moving on. Update, environmental testing at school field sites. We have Mr. Olson from Ty and Bond just to give us an update. I know that the board had some questions just in terms about the timeline, some questions about some of the testing results. Mr. Cummings, I don't know if you have any comments you want to make before we...
Only quickly that I would like to thank Mr. Olson for being here this evening to address the board's questions. Earlier this afternoon, we did get some of the testing results from the playscape to the left of Jennings Elementary. Unfortunately, those test results indicate that that playscape is going to have to remain closed. Mr. Olson can certainly speak to this in more detail and more knowledge than I can, but the fundamental issue at both those sites is the railroad timbers, the timbers that were used to keep in the mulch. They were the old pressure-treated materials, and therefore they've caused some leaching into the soil, it appears. So the town, as it is doing at other sites, any place that the town has tested, the town is working with Ty and Bond to develop remediation plans, and the timing of that is still to be determined. So I will be getting those results out to the Jennings community tomorrow morning.
Mr. Olson, do you have any opening remarks that you would like to give to the board, or you just want to take our questions?
I could give a quick overview, and
sure.
Good evening to everybody. I'm Jim Olson from Ty and Bond. I'm a licensed environmental professional. The town brought Ty and Bond on board in August to assist them with this issue across town. We've investigated over 60 different areas at school and parks across the town, including doing a number of sites, 7 schools for the Board of Education. We tested 19 playgrounds. So we've done quite a bit of work, and it's a 3-step process where you come in, you basically investigate a site, and then you get those results back. You compare them to prescribed remediation criteria that's issued by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And once we get that data, we determine whether or not we have to do additional investigation to delineate the extent of the problem. Then we look at it and we say, what do we need to do in the interim to control exposure to users of those fields? We do that in consultation with the Connecticut Department of Health and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP. And then after that, if there are constituents or contaminants above cleanup criteria, we develop remedial action plans for those sites. So it's a multi-step process. There's a lot of sites we're working on, and there's sites that are prioritized. I know your school sites have been prioritized. So we've gone through and we've like I said, we investigated over 60 different sites right now. We've evaluated interim measures to control exposures, working with the Department of Health and DEEP. And we're planning for remediation, and we plan to start remediation at Gould Manor Park this week. And after that, we're going to lead into some of the other priority sites, including some of the school sites. So that's kind of where we are in a nutshell.
All right, Mrs. Gerber.
Hi, thanks for coming tonight. So you said that Gould Manor testing, the remediation is going to be this week?
Correct, starting tomorrow.
It's just going to take this, tomorrow's Friday. I'm sorry, we usually have our meetings on Tuesday, so I keep thinking it's Tuesday. So it's going to go into next week as well?
The contractor says it's going to take 10 days. 10 working days to complete the remediation.
Okay, so basically we're talking about almost the end of October.
Correct.
And so in that period of time, there will be no remediation done at any other sites? You're just focusing on Gould Manor?
That is correct. The town plans on using the same contractor for all of the sites. I believe the contractor was issued a purchase order for Gould Manor Park, and the contractor has been provided with the information for the additional sites in terms of the remediation plans and the volumes of soil, and the town's waiting for a cost from that contractor to do those, and they're going to address this through a change order. The contractor is Red Technologies.
I'm sorry, what's the name?
The contractor's name is Red Technologies.
Okay. And so, but now the remediation plans were put together by your company?
Correct.
So is there any way we can find out what those plans are? Have they already been developed and now it's just a matter of everything being remediated, or are you still working on additional plans? Like for
we
the
have-
schools, obviously is what I'm referencing.
Correct. Yeah, we have some plans that are completed, and we provided those to the town. Some sites are a little more complicated. We're still developing remedial plans and in consultation with DPH and DEEP. So, but yes, their plans have been prepared.
So some plans have been shared with the town. Have they been shared with the district as well?
I'm not sure. I have not sent those, but I sent them to the town.
Okay, well, I guess then maybe through the chair, to the chair, and to Mr. Cummings, perhaps if a conversation could take place with the town leadership, just because if there are remediation plans that are out there, I think it would be really helpful for them to be posted somewhere or for information to be shared with the school communities that are going to be having their remediation. If there are actually plans in place. I was under the impression that there were plans, but if something's already there on paper or online somewhere, I think it would be helpful, unless there's some reason not to have it be shared with the school communities just so they can understand what's going to happen.
Yeah, they were just completed. And so what we have you seen the Gold Manor RFP? That was
Yes.
posted.
Yes.
So that has an excavation plan for the park. It's a map showing the excavation limits. It also has technical specifications that are part of it that tells a contractor how he has to do his work.
Okay.
So for each additional sites, we're basically having an excavation plan, but we use those same set of specifications, Gould Manor Park. So probably the only thing you're missing are the excavation plans, which is a map.
Okay. Yeah, just because, I know that Gould Manor, each one is unique, I think, is my understanding from looking at the maps of the schools that did have sites that needed to be remediated. So, yeah, that was just a question I had, if we could. And I had one more question after that.
Mr. Pappas, do we have a timeline of what school site is next after Gould Manor? If Gould Manor's first in the town, we cannot do it simultaneously?
We're working with Brian Carey from DPW to set up a time frame for when Jennings will be done. Jennings will be the first school site addressed. I don't even know yet if Gould Manor has to be completed before they begin that. I'm actually going to be, Brian Carey and I spoke this evening, he's going to be sending the plans over, the excavation plans over, and him and I will be walking Jennings tomorrow to address it and figure out what the time frame will be on that project.
Okay. Mrs. Scrubber?
Well, I guess just to follow up on that, so the earliest that Jennings would be taking place would be the week of the 28th then, assuming that Gould Manor does take a full 10 working days.
We're
That would
hoping
get us.
not, but we're hoping to be able to run it simultaneously, but
But if we can't,
yes.
then we're looking at the week
10
of the
days.
28th for Jennings, for both playscapes and the field area, or?
It's just the playscapes at Jennings. The field area is kind of part of the playscapes.
Got it, right, okay. But both playscapes?
Yes.
Okay. And then after that, theoretically, each one of the other schools that have, I know some of them, my understanding is they're fairly minor.
Yeah, like McKinley will be a minor quick.
Right.
And
Okay.
the big one will be Mill Hill.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing, I don't know if any of the other board members checked their board mail. At 7:01, we had an email from the RTM District 4 members who are at their own meeting tonight. They had a specific question regarding the Stratfield playground and the concerns there. I guess it would be, maybe I'll just be easy if I just read it. It's fairly brief. The given reason, so they said they'd like to have the representative from Ty and Bond explain the basis for not remediating Stratfield School playground. It is our understanding that the given reason is that the contaminated soil found at Stratfield is considered safe by Meg Harvey, as it is under 1.5 to 2 feet of wood chips. We would like to clarify that only wood chips are an effective and safe barrier to ensure the children of Stratfield schools can safely play. We would like to clarify and ensure Ty and Bond is aware that there is not a rubber barrier between the wood chips and the contaminated soil, only a landscaping material which decomposes over time. We're under the impression that they're under the impression, so perhaps you can help with this impression, that under the RDEC standards, which applies to playgrounds and recreational facilities, the proper remediation is to make the contaminated soil inaccessible, would be to ensure the contaminated material is more than 4 feet below the ground surface. Can the representative from Ty and Bond please clarify what regulations were used when consulting with Meg Harvey, and just reiterating, which is something that we've heard from members of the public as well, that they're just concerned that the 1.5 to 2 feet of wood chips is simply not enough. So if there could be some clarification on that, I think it would be really helpful for that community.
Yes, for Stratfield, and let me give you a little background on that site. So we investigated it. We went through the wood chips, and there was like a filter fabric landscaping barrier below the filter fabric, and then we sampled the soil underneath. When we sampled the soil, we noticed there was pieces of asphalt in there, and then so that prompted us to look at some of the historical aerial photographs for that school. And that school dates back, I believe, it was like 1929. It's a fairly old school. If you look there was an old asphalt surface there years ago. So what we're probably seeing there is remnants of an old asphalt surface. And asphalt in itself is full of pHs. You go to any asphalt, it's very high in pHs. So the pHs we're seeing there are probably from this asphalt there that's been there, for many years. And if you recall, I said earlier that it's a three-step approach. One, we investigate it. Two, we look at what interim measures we need to protect users of that playscape. And three, what are the long-term remediation plans? So we've done the investigation, and then we're in step two, in consultation with DPH. We both agreed, or our opinion is that the wood chips in itself are a protective barrier, along with the filter fabric underneath it. Now, the third step, remediation, that hasn't been determined yet. We're still working with DPH and DEEP on the long-term remediation needs for that playground.
Can you clarify that? Because I'm under the impression we were told that the long-term remediation plan was leaving the mulch in place, ensuring that depth remained intact through periodic and multiple inspections throughout the year, and that once that school came up for a full mulch replacement, that we would look into making sure that there was a barrier there. So just to confirm, right now you're actually saying that you're still looking at an alternate remediation other than just, because that completely conflicts with what we were told at the last meeting, what I understood from the letter from your company and the letter from Meg Harvey. So this is, just to be clear, I'm asking this now in public because this could potentially create a lot of confusion.
It is a confusing process, and so what our letter said is that we concur with Department of Health that the 2 feet of mulch or the layer of mulch there is a protective means to control exposures. We didn't say in our letter that was the remediation. Now, there was a question before, and what is remediation on a site? Okay, so if you want me to answer a question, let me just explain that a little bit.
Great.
So a remediation can be, for this particular contaminant, it can be excavating the soil. It can be placing a barrier there, such as what's there, the mulch, or 3, chemically treating it. I don't think chemically treating is a viable option here. So I think your options are either 1 is digging it up, or 2, putting a barrier there.
I didn't understand what 3 was.
It was like you can do certain chemical treatments for...
Treatments, okay, I didn't
chemical
understand.
treatments. I don't think
I
it's
didn't hear
really
the word
applicable
treatment.
for this situation.
Okay.
So, that can be the long-term remediation means by putting a cap there of these wood chips and maintaining it, as DPH has indicated.
Okay, so what we're saying now is that Gould Manor is the only location out of the identified locations needing some sort of remediation that is moving forward, and that Stratfield is actually still on the list for exploration of further remediation, which could wind up being leaving the mulch as is with the barrier, or other processes including excavating the soil.
Correct. And let me give a little more background. To remediate a site, you essentially need to be in a remediation program. None of these sites are in a remediation program.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so basically as an LEP, I'm authorized by DEEP to sign off on certain sites that are in remediation programs. None of these sites are in remediation programs, and the way you get into a program is either 1, by order from the state, 2, you're in what they call the property transfer program, which isn't applicable to these sites. 3 is a voluntary remediation program, or 4 is if you trigger a significant environmental hazard when you have a very high concentration that's reportable. So these sites aren't enrolled in a program per se. I'm hired as the LEP, and what I usually recommend in these kind of situations that you consult with DPH and DEEP, that everybody agrees or concurs this is the long-term remediation.
So
approach
who
for
is
these
making
sites.
the determination that we are either not or going to consider enrolling or voluntarily enrolling or petitioning the state to enact a remediation program? This is clearly out of the board and apparently the public school system's realm. So who is responsible for this?
That would be
determination?
the owner of the sites, the town.
The town? Okay. So to date, has the town taken steps to determine whether we're going to go down that path or not? And if so, what are the benefits of being in a program versus doing it how I understand we're doing it now outside of a program?
To answer your first question, the town has consulted, as well as myself, with DPH and DEEP on the interim measures and the remediation requirement. That process is ongoing. We had a call yesterday with DPH and DEEP. DPH has been very involved all along the way, and DEEP, it's been a little slow, but we had a call yesterday, and we agreed that we would share remediation plans with them for their comment. And then, the difference is the only program that probably would be applicable to these school sites that you can enroll in would be the volunteer remediation program. But that would require me as the LEP to say your entire site complies with the remediation standard regulations. So that would require me to investigate the entire site.
Can you give an example of what that would mean?
Well, it would mean you would have to investigate you would have to do the site would have to go through like what they call a site assessment process. So instead of just focusing on like the fields or the playgrounds, I would have to look at the site in its entirety to say, I have to look at your tanks, I would have to look at your areas
Understood.
around
So
the
let me
building.
cut to the chase. What is the benefit of being in a program versus not being program? Is there state funding? Is there grants? Is there something like what's the point of being enrolled in a program if there's no financial benefit to it?
It comes about quite a bit in the commercial world when sites are transferred. If an entity's buying a site or a bank is lending on it, they want some assurance that the site is in compliance with standards and is clean. If a bank has to foreclose on a site, they're not going to be stuck with a contaminated site.
So it's basically getting DEEP further involved, in essence, and it's
Right.
getting them to ensure that they are signing off on it or whatnot. Is
Right.
that what I understand? Okay, so one of the things you just said has caused me pause because we had a couple instances, one when the first selectman and health director, Sands Cleary, were up here, and then our secondary meeting when just Mr. Cleary was here. And correct me if I'm wrong, I was under the assumption that DEEP and DPH were not necessarily heavily involved in that they were telling us that they didn't really feel that the issues we had were alarming or that concerning, and that their involvement was because at the request of the health director and Ty and Bond, they were getting involved, and that in fact, they probably wouldn't be involved unless we were asking for them. So when you say heavy involvement, is it because of those requests from the town?
Yeah, I recommended to the town that they involve DPH and DEEP to get at least some state involvement and assurance that the actions we were taking were appropriate.
Okay. And just to the chair and to the board, I have several more questions on this. Do you mind if I keep going?
Can I just one clarifying question?
Yep.
On this point of having pulled in the state agencies, it was a little bit circular that I'm hearing in terms of going forward with remediation or not. You're saying that no one's making us do it. For us to be in a remediation program or anything, it would be voluntary. If we don't get in that, whatever remediation we're doing is determined by the town which is going to resort to your recommendation and the state recommendation, and we're right back where we started. So how would we, for example, with Stratfield, be proceeding any differently than how we were 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, which is that we're simply leaving the mulch in place. I understand that the idea being that it's safe for those children to be on it now, or at least that's what we're being told. But who would be taking the step of saying, no, given time, given next summer, we're actually going to do either an excavation or put down that rubber barrier? Who's going to be saying that? Because all the town is going to do is to come back to the experts as they should, and the experts are saying we don't need to do that. So in what way do you cast any doubt on what we've been told is what they're going to recommend? That question made sense to me. I'm not sure if it did to anybody else.
And I think that we're the Board of Education. We are not professionals. We are looking to you for guidance and advice. The decision to test the playscapes was not made by the town. It was made by the superintendent. If you told us that we should not let children on those playscapes, we would have done it, as we're doing at Jennings. So don't tell us what you think. We want to hear. We really are looking for you, that if you say that you should close the playground, we'll close the playground. If you're telling us that the mulch is enough of a barrier and that the contaminants, the asphalt that's in the soil, we should not be concerned about exposure, then that's the situation. But we're looking to you. We're putting our trust in you.
I understand.
Just...
No, I understand.
So as we're saying, we're
It's a
going around
confusing
in
process, I understand.
circles,
Yeah.
and
It's a confusing process, and let me just address that. Is our opinion is, and we concur with DPH, that the wood mulch is a protective barrier and it controls exposure. Remediation ultimately is a way to control exposure. Okay, there's several ways you can come about that. You can dig the soil up, or you can leave the mulch in place. And again, it's our opinion that the mulch is a protective barrier.
okay.
So if that's the case, why don't we close that file? Why isn't that file closed? Why are you sitting here? And again, as the chair said, please understand, I very much appreciate the fact that you're here, because we're hearing information that is contradictory to what we've been told by the town, and now I feel quite honestly misled on some of this stuff. So I'm not happy. It has nothing to do with you. But if the state and Ty and Bond feel that the mulch is satisfactory, why is that file still opened?
Because we want to involve DEEP and get their agreement that it is.
So the letter from Meg Harvey, who I was told it went all the way up to the commissioner for verification that she could state that.
Right.
If her letter and everything isn't enough, what have we been doing? Because I've been relying, and I've been telling my constituents and Fairfield Public Schools families that I support these plans, and I supported opening Stratfield because I was told by the state, by DEEP, right, by the DPH, that it's safe. But now we still need to go to them. Pardon me. We still need to go to them for a final sign-off before we close that file. I'm just, and again, you said it's a confusing process.
It's a very confusing process, and I'm trying to make it as clear as I can, but, DPH and DEEP are two different departments.
Understand. I work in public health, so I get it.
Okay, so as an LEP, and then when you're not in a program, I try to do whatever I can to get our clients, some kind of assurance at the state level, since you're not formally in a program, and that's generally some kind of a concurrence or letter. I mean, you ultimately want that as a town that, it's not just me saying it as an LEP, and I try to get DPH, and I try to get DEEP on board to agree with it if you're not in a formal program. So we've gone that far with DPH on some of these sites. I'm trying to get DEEP on board too.
Okay, so, sorry, Mr. Jacobson, I just, let me go here, please. So we have Gould Manor Park that has been identified. Can you elaborate and give us your opinion, because we really clearly don't know anything now? What, from your experience, because this is what you do, in a situation and scope of this magnitude, whether it be small or not, right? Is it normal for a town with this many sites needing attention, even if some of them are minor, to just use one contractor? Like, why can't we be doing Gould and Stratfield or wherever it is, or Riverfield Field? Why can't, if those sites are so minor, why do we have to use this one company to do it? Is it because of a financial savings? I mean, because if that's the case, then okay, that's a reason. But I'm a little flabbergasted as to what the delay, because what I'm worried about is we are a month and a half away from December and ground freezing and stuff. And yes, stuff can still be excavated and everything, but I was hopeful that this was all going to be handled and remediated before the winter, so that come the spring, everything's good to go and ready to play, ready to run. So can you answer to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, like I said before, Gould Manor Park will take 10 days. They'll roll into those other sites right after that. They're fairly minor. I think, another 10 days should address all those other sites. They're fairly minor compared to Gould Manor Park.
With the exception of Jennings, is that correct? Because we don't have a plan for there yet, right?
Yeah, Jennings is a little more involved. We're still developing a plan for that. Can work be done concurrently? Yeah, absolutely. If they want to get another crew out there, we haven't been asked that yet, but certainly if.
So the town made the decision to hire one contractor. The RFP. I don't know whether there was multiple. Maybe only one came back. I don't know.
They got a number of bids for Gould Manor Park, and I think they got some competitive pricing. Actually, I think it's quicker, rather than go out to bid again for another contractor for the additional sites, is to use Red Technologies and to use those same rates for these additional sites.
So we haven't actually bid for those other sites yet.
I know the town has presented the information to Red Technologies for pricing, and they're waiting on that right now.
Okay.
Can I follow up on that particular question?
Yep.
Ms.
Mr.
Stacy?
Dwyer.
Yeah, go ahead.
My understanding is what you just said is that it'll be quicker to deal with the same contract and use change order pricing rather than go out to a public bid on each site.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just to add to that was discussed a little bit at the last Board of Finance meeting, where they were concerned. The mobilization fee, as I understand, for some of these things can be like $7,500. So they want to try to minimize that in some ways by not starting.
Understood. Thank you for clarifying that. So can you confirm, as far as remediation plans for the Fairfield Public School sites, which sites actually have a plan, as Mrs. Gerber asked, which sites on Fairfield Public School property currently have a remediation plan and will be ready to go for this change order or bid?
Sure. We have a plan for Jennings.
Can you clarify for Jennings what, because you just said we don't, so you're talking about the original field portion, not the...
For the playground area. We have a plan for that.
For both of them?
Yes. That's pretty straightforward. I mean, we have a small amount of soil that needs to be removed around one playground that's impacted with arsenic, and then the arsenic impacted wood timbers.
Okay, so Mr. Cummings, have you seen a remediation plan for any of these?
No, we haven't.
Okay. Can you, piggybacking on Mrs. Gerber, can you ensure that we get these plans immediately, please? So our superintendent of schools knows. I asked the health director to make sure that building administrators, and I think it might have even been, I actually asked the first selectman and the health director when they were both here, to ensure that building administrators were fully aware and part of the remediation planning process. And I was told flat out that that will be done. And so if our superintendent doesn't know, the building administrators don't know. So if we have a remediation plan for a school, they need to be involved. And so please make sure that that happens. Okay. So to clarify, Jennings and where else?
I'll just go down the list right now of the sites we identified that need some form of remediation. For Mill Hill Elementary School, there was some pH impacted soil found along this ADA ramp. That one's a little more complicated. We need input from DPH and DEEP on that, and we're working on that. For Burroughs Park soccer field, we found one sample with some asbestos in there, and there's a plan in place to remediate that area. Jennings Beach Playground.
Can I clarify, you were just interested in schools, right?
Yeah, I mean, people watching probably want to know this because they're not getting this information, but for tonight, I'd like the
Excuse me,
public schools.
when was this decided? When did this information get put together?
These are things I've been discussing with the town.
Okay.
And so in terms of formal plans, when was this in place?
It was within the last week. I emailed them with some plans.
So they're getting, and now they're finding out the company to do the work, and they have that ready to go. I don't want to start this grand conspiracy that everything is being kept secret, and let's start another fight about this. Let's be calm and neutral and rational and stop looking for a fight.
I'm not looking for
Hey,
a fight.
hey. No one's,
Yes.
let's stay calm.
And I'll caveat to say that Gould Manor Park was done a couple weeks ago. So,
All right, so to Mr. Dwyer's point, I do want to,
Yes,
this
school
is
property.
a very big issue and it will take a lot of time. So I do want to focus on our schools because our top priority is making sure that we know that we're sending our
Maybe
kids
Mr.
out
Papa George
on
can
schools
confirm.
that are safe and would like to know when we can open them to get the kids back on. So if there's any, and I understand it seems like things are being finalized this week.
yeah. and I
If you
can
have a
just-
timeline in terms of when we're going to get the plans for the school sites and when remediation can begin. It sounds like it's going to be at least probably 2 weeks if we're waiting until after Gould Manor, realistically.
Yeah. For the school sites, it really just boils down to the two sites I mentioned, the Jennings Elementary School and the Mill Hill.
So the others are still on to be determined.
The other ones, we've already investigated them, and they do not need remediation.
What about,
Ms. Gerber.
and what, you know what, no, just a comment. I take offense to Mrs. Maxon Kennelly's comment because I asked, and I just brought it back up, that I wanted the school administration involved. That's my point here. There's no grand conspiracy. There's no fighting. I want to make sure that moving forward, the building administrators and the superintendent of the schools are well aware
Asa,
of what's
Mr.
going on
Asa.
their
And that's
property.
fine, except that information is brand new. It hasn't been kept secret
a week
from
old.
everybody. No, Gould Manor.
Mill Hill and Jennings have been developed.
Who's running this
Hey,
meeting?
take a deep breath.
Can I just ask a question?
You may. We are going to do one question at a time.
There's two.
To Mr. Ace's point, he did ask that as remediation plans were developed, that's building administrators be notified of the plans
And be part of the plan.
and be part of the planning. That was, look in the minutes, it was stated at the very first meeting when this was addressed to that board before us.
And I'm
Mr.
addressing
Asa, I'm
public
just going to
school
ask,
properties.
I agree with you. We understand. Let's just take the emotion down a little bit. I'm going to go to Mrs. Gerber, and then I'll go back to you to finish your point, Mrs. Gerber.
Well, I'm just kind of piggybacking on that. So you said that the only school plans are Jennings and Mill Hill?
Yeah, and I'll clarify. Those are the two we have, school sites. We have.
Right, but there are
Planning.
other school sites. There's Osborne
Correct,
Hill.
Correct, let me just
Right.
finish. So
Okay.
those are the two school sites that, one, we have a plan in place. The second one, we're still discussing with DPH and DEEP. And then if you get to the playgrounds, there's a number of playgrounds that, where there's contaminants detected over the standards that are now, where exposures are being controlled with wood chips. And based on our consultation with DPH, and we're in agreement with that tie and bond. So generally, exposures are controlled at those sites right now. So we do not, right now, remediation is not planned.
Okay, could you just specify what those sites are, please?
I did provide all these sites to Mr. Papa George here on September 11th, and I'll just go down through the list here. So we had, where we had exceedances, it was at McKinley, Stratfield, the Ludlow High School courtyard, Dwight, Holland Hill, and Jennings.
Okay,
I mentioned before with Jennings, since it's not under wood chips, we have exposed soil right on the edge of the playground, we have the wood timbers. That's why we have a remediation plan in place for that one right now.
okay, but that's still, there are some fields at schools that my understanding was they were going to have remediation, Osborne Hill and Riverfield.
Yes.
So
And there's
I'm-
still a black target.
I'm just trying to get some clarification on those two sites as well, because we did get the information about the playscapes. Yes, that I know, and I guess now I'm a little confused still about the whole Stratfield thing, but to go back to the other thing, we do have two fields that we were told we're going to require remediation.
Yeah, if you mentioned Osborne Hill Elementary,
Correct.
we did not have any exceedances there, any issues at that school.
By the baseball field?
What, the softball field, baseball field, yes, we were told there was.
There was a drainage area.
By the third baseline.
By a ditch or
Yeah,
something?
sorry, let me just get to, there's so many of these sites that it's, try to keep.
That's where they used fill.
Are you talking about this one right here?
Really?
That's not an exposure issue.
It's from Santa Clara, he had a small
Yeah.
football thing.
Yeah, yeah, we didn't find any exceedances of what they call the direct exposure criteria, which is like an exposure ingestion, so I don't know where the confusion came about at that, but,
And I'm sorry, that was for Osborne Hill?
correct.
What about Riverfield?
Statistics.
Yeah, Riverfield, let's see, let me just go to my map here.
There is an area closed off there currently.
Yeah, Riverfield is, we didn't have any exceedances there. We did additional sampling there and statistically evaluated the data and determined that it was compliant.
I'm
I mean,
I'm
and
sorry,
it's confusing, so,
I'm really confused because we were told that was one of the areas that did have an exceedance. It's still, part of, that area is still covered.
yeah, now,
So-
let me, it's confusing, so what happens, remember back before I said, we went in initially, we did some initial samples, right? We'd do like 3 samples on a school, we'd look at it, and that site initially had an exceedance, but under the investigation and cleanup regulations, and as part of the way you investigate a site, you do more samples, because 3 samples is not going to really tell you the full picture sometimes. So we went back to that site, and we did a number of additional samples. We did approximately 20. And what the regulations allow you to do is to statistically evaluate the data in its entirety. So you look at all the data together, and you do a statistical analysis, determine if it's compliant with the cleanup criteria, and it was.
So what's going to happen with that area that's still covered in black?
It's technically it's compliant with the regulations.
Mrs. Gerber, can I ask a follow-up?
Oh,
Yeah,
Mr.
fine.
Asa?
Yes. So just to be clear with Riverfield, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying about the supplemental testing and everything. The problem I have is that a release from the town and on the town website, originally when this all surfaced, it said that while the exceedance were relatively low, they were above the RDEC standard, and that Riverfield Elementary School and Jennings Elementary School would require remediation. So now, to be clear, what we're saying is that there is no remediation needed because further testing was done, and even though that there's still a site that is elevated over the RDEC standard, we're now going back on what was told to us and the entire town. And I do remember this conversation. I thought someone saying that it could be as simple as covering it up and sodding it or digging up the soil, but we were told that that was going to be done. So now I'm really confused.
It's not something I said, but, I think it always said that the sites are going under further evaluation, and further evaluation is doing additional sampling and analysis.
So what about the original site that was above the RDEC? We're just dismissing that because the surrounding soil is clear?
Yeah, it was very, very minorly over the
The
residential
town
standard.
told the school system they were going to remediate it. And my kid goes to Riverfield, and I drive by it all the time. I was there today. And the field is covered in a black tarp. It's a small area. I'll give you that. I'm not arguing that. But the Riverfield community is under the impression that that small area covered in a black tarp that's had caution tape around it for a month or more was going to have something done. And if you tell me that you're going to dig up an area the size of this table, so be it. You're the expert, or the state's the expert. But now I'm being told that nothing's going to be done. So does that mean that Mr. Cummings can call Miss Roxby tomorrow and tell them that the kids can run on top of that black tarp? Or is somebody going to go out there and remove the black tarp and now all of a sudden it's safe?
I'm telling you that the soil is in compliance with the remediation standard regulations for that site.
I'm going to stop here.
Mr. Dwyer.
I think what Mr. Acer is bringing up is that we may be in technical compliance with the remediation standards, but the town has said out of an abundance of caution, let's go beyond that. And so perhaps what needs to happen is for our superintendent to communicate that philosophy and say we would still prefer to get a remediation plan for whether it's a table size or whatever the size is, and proceed in that direction, irregardless of what the state standards or professional standards might be, that out of an abundance of caution, if we find it, let's fix it. And so I'm wondering if that was the original approach, where that got lost in all the technical reviews.
As your LEP, I'm here to advise you on what the regulations require.
Yes, that's what I understand.
Those regulations have many, many layers of
Yeah.
conservatism built into them. So I think what's there is protective. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't comment on perception and
Yeah,
people's
correct.
feelings and things like that. I mean, my job is to do what's prescribed to me by DEEP as an LEP.
Yeah, no, and I accept that. I think that he is representing your professional standard and opinion, and if we wish to, out of an abundance of caution, to go beyond that, as we sometimes have done in writing curriculum, we've gone above and beyond Common Core state standards, and I think in this instance, we want to do the same thing.
Can you clarify we? Because the town said they would fund it. The town said they would fund Riverfield. So if we decide that we want it done, are you suggesting that the town not pay for that now? Or we still stick to the plan?
I think you're getting into the weeds. I think
Yeah,
we ought to ask our superintendent to contact the town and to continue the conversation to get back to that original philosophical statement.
Ms. Pitka. You had your hand up, Mr. Peterson.
I just, maybe Mr. Cummings can answer this, get a clarification about the path in the Ludlow courtyard. My recollection of that conversation was that as long as the kids stay on the paved path, it's fine, and that there's no mulch there, there's grass, and that we would tell kids to not eat their lunches on the lawn. But what I'm hearing from Ty and Bond is that there's no remediation plan for that space. So unless my recollection is mistaken, that seems like absolutely a place we should have a remediation plan.
Our understanding was that for the current use, as long as the students stayed on the blacktop, they would be fine. And that if
We're talking about children, though.
Right. But the blacktop served as a remediation barrier because it would prevent direct contact with the soil.
Right.
And that the town, or the town with its advisors, would develop a remediation plan for the courtyard itself. Whether that would consist of a mulch barrier or something else was still to be determined. And that we were going to wait on that till it was at an opportune time with school being out of session to take that on, because it would require transport of something through the building, whatever that would be.
But in any event, it can't be, if that's the case, listed as a site that needs no remediation. Correct?
Correct.
Did you say earlier that it was a site that needed no remediation?
Can I
I think
just
it did.
clarify?
If I'm wrong, this is my understanding, that I want to make sure that is this area that gets remediated.
I want to just say that we go forward on that information. So we're at a point of comfortability saying we can do this, we're waiting on that. And to Mr. Dwyer's point, that comfortability just can't go away, right? When we hear that suddenly something else, the metric changes. The thing that drove this very thing around the Playscapes was making sure that people were comfortable sending their kids to school and that we were protecting them. If the metric changes under our feet, I find that difficult to explain to parents that the value system changed and therefore suddenly everything's okay. I find that very difficult to bring forward.
Mrs. Mascanelli.
At this point, we have definitely heard contradictory information. There's multiple parties at work on this, hard at work on this, updates that we're not fully aware of. What I would request through the chair to Mr. Cummings is that between Mr. Cummings, Mr. Angelus, whatever a distinct tight group could do, if we could get a narrative update, site by site of the identified places, where we are, what this timeline is going forward, what's getting addressed, what has been retested and now no longer needs to be remediated, is TARP being removed? If we could have site by site updates on exactly where we are, I kind of feel like staff needs it as much as we need it, and the public certainly needs to hear this, of exactly what's going on for the school sites. The town takes care of their own sites, but we just in the course of the last half hour have been more confused than we should be, and I'm not hearing definitive answers in the room at this point, so I'm not expecting this tomorrow, but I would hope maybe within a week we can have a clear message, a clear narrative, site by site, what's being done, what needs to be addressed, what's the timeline, is what I would like to request.
May I add to that?
Ms. Picco.
What I was going to say originally, but I thought for sure would be covered, is specifically to know if and what remediation plans will be listed for Jennings, Mill Hill, McKinley, Riverfield, Ludlow High School, Osborne Hill, Holland Hill, Dwight, and Stratfield. If they exist or going to exist, what exactly is going to happen? Because frankly, I'm really confused. And I think we just really confused our public. So I would like that as soon as possible.
Could I address that question?
Yes.
Just because I feel like there is a lot of confusion and I don't want to leave families out there for tomorrow. Are these areas that are cordoned off currently staying cordoned off, or are they being reopened?
We won't open anything until we can be sure that we've only opened the sites that we've been told the current barriers in place are sufficient.
Okay, so based on this new information, nothing has really changed right now. Those cordoned off areas are going to remain cordoned off. Kids are not going to be going on them. We're going to take a deep breath. We're going to figure out where we're at and then reconvene, get plans that are available, wait for others. But for just so everyone knows, what's cordoned off will stay cordoned off and kids will not be going on that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So the status quo is staying the status quo. And as we get new information from Ty and Bond, that information will be put on the website. The sites are there. The status of each field is there. And as we get remediation plans that we did not have, they will go on the website.
Ken all along has been, once we've got those plans, to communicate those out to the families directly, but also post anything to the website as we've done in the past.
Right, so, no, and I think that I know there's a lot of confusion, that information came back that we didn't have, but I think just to kind of bring it back, that it's still relatively organized, and in the information that has gone out to the public has been accurate from the information that, at least from our point of view, the information that we had is accurate. Nothing is being opened based on the conversation that we had tonight. We have not seen the plans. As plans are put forth, they will go to the superintendent. We will ask Mr. Cummings to pass this along to building administrators, and when they are set, to open the fields. They will open the fields and continue the conversation with the board and with the school communities. I want to go back to Stratfield because that's really why we asked you here. Because Jennings, we knew that there was going to be an issue. Our understanding was that there wasn't a plan in place. We've been asking for a timeline for Jennings. We were told it was not ready. I'm happy to hear that it is moving forward. I wish that we had multiple contractors so that we could address all these things at once, but that doesn't seem to be the decision that was made by the town. And I understand the cost savings, but for Stratfield, to be clear, just to be clear, that the mulch there, the fabric there, based on your evaluation of the soil there, the layer of mulch, the information that was given to you and by the State Department of Health, the town Department of Health, we were told that the State Department of Health was in contact with DEEP. We waited a few days till they got their, communication to us that we can safely send children onto that playscape.
Yes.
Does the board have any questions specifically about Stratfield?
Yes.
Ms. Jacobson?
Thank you. So you had previously said, because as Mr. Asa had mentioned at the last conversation about Stratfield, was that was it. Like that 2 feet of mulch periodically was the plan. But tonight it was described as an interim plan. And that a plan for further remediation at Stratfield will be forthcoming or is already available?
Best to be determined. Again, we have the investigation, the interim measures, controlling risks, which we're in that stage right now. And the third piece is, are there long-term remediation plans for a particular site? And that's for the town to decide. And, and as well as with input from the regulators, from DPH and DEEP.
Okay, so again, the town decides if we need to go further, not...
Well, correct, because remember, you're not in a program right now. Nobody's asking you to do it. DEEP's not asking you to do it. You're not under order. You're not in a remediation program. As an LEP, I can't tell you to do remediation. My job is to say, it's to guide you through a program if you're in a program and provide advice if you're not. And like I said, since you're not in a program, I'm saying that you should control exposure, which you are, and then you should make sure you involve the DPH and DEEP, which we are. And then in terms of, can that playground continue to be used safely with the 2 feet of mulch? Yeah. The decision to go in there and pull all that playground equipment out there and pull all the soil out and spend that money is for the town to decide, not me. And I really can't recommend that because, to me, as an LEP, I got to say, is exposure being controlled right now?
And the only other option that you mentioned was, besides the barrier, was actually excavating it. That's the other option, because the chemical one doesn't work for that site. So excavating would be the only other option at this point,
Well, remember,
beyond the barrier.
Remediation can be capping, too, a capping.
Okay, because you had said excavating, barrier,
Yeah.
chemical.
Capping.
So there's a fourth.
A barrier is capping.
Oh, okay.
And then excavating or chemical treating are the main. So I've done many sites where I've used caps to clean up a site, but that's if the site's in a program and it's a prescribed cap where you got input from DEEP and DPH to say, yeah, this is a remediation method, and therefore that is the final remediation.
Can you just explain capping? Sorry, is that like a 4-inch concrete or is that a rubber? What is that?
It can be multiple different things, like a prescribed cap under the remediation center regulations is 2 feet of soil and 3 inches of bituminous asphalt, or else 4 feet of clean soil, or else an alternative cap that's approved by DEEP and DPH.
I thought the asphalt was what's causing the PHAs in the first place.
It is.
And your remediation plan is to put more asphalt.
That's what the regulations say.
It's not what it's doing, it's an option.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that? One question that a constituent mentioned to me about the asphalt fragments, since these are hydrocarbons,
Correct.
is there a chance that they could leach upward?
I don't see that as a migration pathway leaching up through wood chips. I mean, they're under a filter fabric. They're within soil. They're tightly bound to the soil. I don't see it leaching up through.
What does the science say?
That's what the science says.
Thank you.
And I guess if there's a capping sounds a little extreme in some ways, like would we better control exposure by excavating the wood chips and putting down rubber matting as was kind of thought to be there in the first place? Would there be any difference between that and the filter fabric?
I think what you have there is sufficient right now. Would having rubber there be better? I mean, is rubber better than filter fabric? Sure it is, but I don't think it's necessary.
Thank you.
Ms. Leeper, then Ms. Gerber.
So I had this question 30 minutes ago, but Mrs. Jacobson just touched on it. Is our blacktop asphalt, to the chair through, Angeles? Like, are our kids not playing on fields and playscapes because of potential contamination from asphalt and instead on blacktops, which is asphalt? Is that what's happening?
Right, like if you took a piece of blacktop and tested it,
It would be many, many, many orders of magnitude greater than what we're finding on that playground. It's because it's pure pH, it's asphalt. And it really boils down to is that deep and DPH considered asphalt, a surface that's an intact surface where it becomes an issue if the asphalt's broken up in tiny fragments and a kid sticks their hand in the soil and licks their fingers and it gets into their body.
So like every time my kid has dropped a piece of gum on the blacktop and then like put it back in his mouth, that's way
Getting
worse
some
than what we're
pHs.
talking about being 2 feet under the wood chips. But that's where our kids have been playing this duration of time to prevent them from being on the playscapes and fields.
You go along any roadway in Connecticut or any parking lot, you're going to find pHs right on the edge of the parking lot in the soil.
And I'm not saying this to make light of it. Actually, it's like quite alarming when you really think about the contaminants we all live amongst every day. But it does bring me to another point that like I think the public is also wondering these types of things. And to Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli's point, if we could get some sort of summative of all of the school-related playscapes and fields, and I don't want to be assigning additional work, but also a little bit of history, because all of these are different, and all of them are coming from different sources, it seems, or a plethora of sources anyways. Railroad ties at Jennings, my understanding was Riverfield was dripping oil from likely a truck, asbestos some places, arsenic other places, and that I think is also helpful for the public to understand the variety of the contaminants, and also this is part of living in a very mature community that has old facilities. Not to make light of it, but just to add additional context to the conversation.
Yep. Ms. Gerber?
I really don't want to beat a dead horse here, but since you brought it up, with Stratfield, because I think what kind of got this whole ball rolling and opening up this whole can of worms was your statement that, well, the chips are fine for now, but there may be something later. So I guess my question is, at what point will we know if there is something later? Is there a timeline for that?
Well, that depends on two things, what the town wants to do for the long term, if they want to just use the wood chips for the long term, if they want to excavate the soil, remove all the playground equipment. And there's also the possibility, if DEEP ever has any kind of requirement in the future.
Okay.
Which is probably unlikely, but I can't, predict what DEEP would require.
Mr. Papageorge?
Could they determine that the mulch would be considered exempt at that point?
Mrs. Maxon-Cannelli?
Just one quick thing. You talk about DEEP coming out with new regulations. Isn't in fact part of the problem of this whole situation has been that there's industry standard, resident standards, but this whole idea of recreation standards, that they don't exist. So that could be a possible future eventuality that would prompt a reexamination that will be long after we're off the board.
Yeah, DEEP's been trying to get recreational standards passed for quite a while. The original remediation standard regulations were passed in 97. And, you know, practicing in this field, you know, you have a residential cleanup standard, then you have an industrial commercial.
Right.
But a lot of these sites we work on, if you ever heard the term like a brownfield site, right, like these underutilized sites, you know, you have vast areas of fill on these sites. And when brownfields development, you try to integrate a lot of green within these brownfield sites, recreational areas. And then if you look at cleaning all these passive recreational standards or areas up to a residential standards, it's very expensive, and it's a disincentive to develop these sites.
Right.
So what DEEP has been trying to do is come up with these recreational standards, which and they do that in concert with DPH, and we have been looking at that for these sites.
So that would be something in the future that might cause action.
Yeah, if anything, you know, they'll be less stringent than the residential standards.
Right. Thank you.
So just because we asked this question, well, what would the alternative be if we determined that the mulch chips wasn't enough? And it sounds like excavation would be the alternative, would be to remove the playground and just remove all that soil.
Well, you could put a more robust cap system there.
Or a cap.
You know, the rubber or concrete, or else, you know, stick with the mulch and have a maintenance and monitoring program.
Which is what the plan that we have right now. Rubber or, okay.
Can I ask one question?
Yep. Mr. Dwyer?
The contaminants that you're talking about came from asphalt that was there a long time ago.
Correct.
I assume the asphalt was more than just where the playground is, when you look at old photos?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely outside the playground.
Right, so if we wanted to go beyond, then we would saying whatever the area of asphalt was, let's excavate that entire area, pick up the asphalt, and then put in clean dirt and then rebuild everything. Is that what would be required? Because if we don't pick up all of the asphalt, we're still going to get tests in future years that say there's a contaminant there. Am I following this correctly?
You're correct. The asphalt impacted soil is not just under that little
Yeah.
playground. It's beyond that. But you got to understand too that could be a pretty significant cost ramification.
And I'm just pointing that out because that's something that the Board of Ed would have to talk about in future years as to how far they wanted to carry this.
Absolutely, and this would hit our budget.
Just
Ms. Sleeper?
so if we did something like that, we would put down clean soil to abut our asphalt.
Right.
Okay.
To abut our asphalt.
That our kids play on every single day.
Right.
Yes.
That
Okay.
are the cause of
Yep.
remediating the soil that is there.
Let me volunteer.
Mr. Asa?
Just real quick, at our last meeting, there was a gentleman from the public that got up, and he was very passionate about this subject at Stratfield. And one of the things he brought up was the difference between Connecticut and New York regulations and numbers. Can you just touch on that briefly? Just because I have had several other people since then ask me outside of the board, and quite honestly, my answer to this point has been, I'm going by what we were provided by Ty and Bond and Meg Harvey, and that we're in Connecticut and not in New York. And I don't know the reasoning behind that, but any elaboration on that would be great.
The way it works is the federal EPA sets overall cleanup standards for the nation. States have the ability to promulgate their own cleanup regulations, but they have to be as stringent or more stringent than federal regulations. And a lot of times, whatever makes it through the state legislature, you know, what people think or feel at the time, they can be more stringent. A lot of times they are. I've done work in New York in the regulations. I'm a professional geologist in New York, but as an LEP, I'm using what the state of Connecticut provides me as what they feel is protective for Connecticut. And it's not uncommon to see differences between states. And you mentioned before, a number of people mentioned about the summary of the sites. I certainly can provide that within a week or so to you. I know all this information is confusing, I apologize, but I think a summary might provide some clarity.
For Stratfield, for the fill that was there, there is just concern with the Julian pile. Based on your observations, do you think that fill from the Julian pile was used as draft field?
No, the Julian fill, the indicator parameters there are, the asbestos, which we saw over at Gould Manor Park, potentially PCBs, high lead, and arsenic. We're not seeing any of those things. I know we've seen arsenic on some of the school sites, but we think the arsenic came off the wood timbers, which are pretty high, and also arsenic can occur naturally in Connecticut above the cleanup standard of 10 milligrams per kilogram. It's just from the rocks that came from. They're high in arsenic-bearing minerals. But no, I mean, from our observations and research of the Stratfield site, looking at the aerial photographs and the previous asphalt in that area, and the construction timing, it doesn't appear to be any kind of Julian fill there.
Thank you. Any last questions from the board? Thank you for coming and answering our questions, and I'm sorry if we got a little heated. I hope that you understand that we're really just trying to do what's best for the children that attend the Fairfield Public Schools. There's been a lot going on the town side that we've tried to just stay removed from and just keep our focus on, doing the work, listening to the professionals, and moving forward. If you could provide some just more information about, we think it's from the pressure-treated wood for the arsenic. Mm-hmm. There was a playground, asphalt there. That would be helpful. And then we'll work with, Mr. Papageorge and Mr. Cummings about getting it out to the school community. So thank you for your time and for
you're welcome.
meeting with us.